Toxic masculinity, our lead off into 2019. The buzzwords of a new year and a continuation of a narrative that seems to contradict nature itself. Now, what is that narrative? What is toxic masculinity? Well, that depends on whom you ask, doesn't it? It seems a logical step would be to first define the word masculinity and then characterize this noun with the adjective toxic. But as we will discuss, we aren't dealing with logic when addressing this narrative, so let's cut to the chase. For many years now, there's been a steady drumbeat originating from global entities that mainstream American establishment has adopted as their metronome, and they have delivered a steady chorus of articles and essays over the years highlighting the evils of this common enemy known as toxic masculinity. Now, just recently, we were delivered a multi-pronged dose of social engineering from both the entertainment industry and the medical pharmaceutical complex. It's important to note that many times such things come in waves, and within a short news cycle, we were presented with not only a well-publicized Gillette commercial, but also with a group of articles highlighting the new APA guidelines for the psychological practice with boys and men. One popular headline was from the New York Times. Traditional masculinity can hurt boys, says new APA guidelines. Now, even though these guidelines were approved last August and will be in effect until 2028, they were brought into the news cycle by an article in this month's edition of APA's online publication, which we see here. Now, some of it reads, men commit 90% of the homicides in the United States and represent 77% of homicide victims. They're the demographic group most at risk of being victimized by violent crime. They are also 3.5 times more likely than women to die by suicide, and their life expectancy is 4.9 years shorter than men's. Boys are far more likely to be diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder than girls, and they face harsher punishments in school, especially boys of color. Now, most of these figures have been well known and have followed a long historic trend that paints a very clear picture. Life is harder for men. Life is more dangerous for a man. Men are more likely to be killed by violent crime, and it's also worth mentioning that this same trend carries over to vocational deaths as well. While we don't want to disparage any attempt to improve mental health, there is definitely a specific worldview that is being promoted. The last quote of the article makes it abundantly clear that the goal is not just helping men, but social change. It reads, if we can change men, we can change the world. But who is the APA, and why should we care what they have to say? Well, the APA is the American Psychological Association. They are the leading scientific and professional organization representing psychology in the United States. They are also the largest accrediting body for professional licensing in the profession. A quick look at my state's license requirements show that applicants with APA accreditation require less approval. For all practical purposes, they are the voice of the psychiatric industry, and as we will see, they create the culture of the profession. Now, a trip to their website will give you a great head start of understanding the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, the how of their charter, their motivation, and their funding. In fact, the heavy influence of the Ford and Rockefeller Foundation when it comes to research grants will likely inspire some future research and videos on non-governmental organizations. But there you can also find the rest of the report in its entirety. Now, having done this, I can certainly say that while the social justice warrior bent is certainly baked into many assumptions made, the report does in part address some issues like men's reluctance to seek medical attention when needed, which seems to be the overall practical takeaway of any. Now, immediately after the introduction, it is made clear that the guidelines are just that, guidelines. We are also presented with a glossary of terms, which gives an indication of the brave new world gender roles. While I won't go guideline by guideline, I will point out that number 5 was encouraging positive father involvement with healthy families. And while I couldn't agree more, I'd rather see it higher on the list and see a clear missed opportunity to connect it with guideline number 2, which is recognizing that males integrate multiple aspects to their social identities across the lifespan. Men's masculinity changes as they age. I just found it interesting that while discussing both the rationale and the application of the guideline, recognizing that men's idea of masculinity and their social roles and such change over life, the idea of paternal and multi-generational male direction and mentoring wasn't mentioned at all, nor any other lifelong support system, even like a trade relationship between apprentices and masters, things of that nature, although they did mention the military. Oddly, what was referenced was the fact that most unaccompanied minors apprehended are male and are often behaviorally and emotionally dysfunctional. And it's highlighted here, in terms of immigration status, the vast majority of unaccompanied minors subsequently apprehended by Border Patrol agents are male. Young men are often escaping unrelenting and escalating violence from their country of origin. And these experiences often reshuffle the emotion, behavioral, and relational dynamics of these individuals and their families. Now, what did seem to rank fairly high also was guideline number 3, understanding the impact of power, privilege, and sexism on the development of boys and men on their relationship with others. This seemed to be an obvious social engineering aspiration. The clear assumption here is that there is male privilege. And if you're wondering how they define male privilege, then you are in luck, because privilege is one of the terms defined in the glossary, complete with contextual example, as we see here. What is privilege? Privilege is defined as unearned sources of social status, power, and institutionalized advantage experienced by individuals by virtue of their culturally valued or dominant social identities, e.g., white, Christian, male, middle, and upper class. Now, if this seems a bit more political than clinical, then perhaps you haven't come to grips with the fact that the psychiatric industry is just another front in a cultural war. Feminist scholars are used as the basis for rationale in suggesting that psychologists in application recruit political allies, in essence radicalizing them. Does that seem a bit out of line? Well, let's go ahead and check out what they say. As we see here, in part of their rationale for guideline number 3, they actually reference feminist scholars. Feminist scholars have argued that some men use violence and control in relationships as a way of maintaining sexist beliefs and dominance over women. Well, there's the rationale. And what's the application? When we come down an application, we can see when working with boys and men, psychologists can address issues of privilege and power related to sexism in a developmentally appropriate way to help them obtain the knowledge, attitudes, and skills to become effective allies and potentially live less restrictive lives. This is about finding allies for a political gain. Okay. Also, we see here that indeed awareness of privilege and the harmful impacts of beliefs and behaviors that maintain patriarchal power have been shown to reduce sexist attitudes in men and have been linked to participation in social justice activities. So the end result here is that, while these guidelines are not binding in application and do address some legitimate areas of concern, the entire report is colored with an obvious push towards extreme social engineering by targeting the vulnerable who happen to be under medical care. The reality is that the modern world is quite accepting when it comes to gender roles. Furthermore, it has never been more socially acceptable for men to abandon masculine stereotypes. While the guidelines seem to bend over backwards to address the needs of self-perceived underserved communities like the LGBT or the Black American male, not one mention is given to the fact that 73% today of the black males that are born today are born to single mothers, and that the American black community is completely matriarchal in nature. Now, many astute observers will find that the most striking and the most ridiculous thing about the entire tone of this report is that for the last several decades, there's been a noticeable decline overall in masculinity. Not only in pop culture and in the entertainment industry, but in the family dynamic and politics. Non-traditional models of masculinity clearly represent the minority for now, but they are overrepresented in the media. Now, America's top news anchors are just an example. Now, yes, there is a crisis in masculinity. There is a clearly identified medical and epigenetic crisis occurring right now and has been for a minimum of several generations worldwide. It is an issue not mentioned or even considered as part of the equation. In 2007, a study published from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found a population-level decline in serum testosterone levels in American men. Now, this decline was independent of any normal decline thought to occur during the male aging process. Now, you remember guideline number 2 on masculinity changing over the lifetime of a man? I wonder if testosterone is a factor, and I wonder why it wasn't a consideration. Now, this study, as best as I can see, was funded by NIH and used 17 years worth of data and subject follow-up and made some very definite and alarming findings, which you can see in the results and conclusion section. And I'm going to read this. We observe a substantial age-independent decline in T that does not appear to be attributable to observed changes in explanatory factors, including health and lifestyle characteristics such as smoking and obesity. The estimated population-level declines are greater in magnitude than the cross-sectional declines in T typically associated with age. Conclusions? These results indicate that recent years have seen a substantial and as yet unrecognized age-independent population-level decrease in testosterone in American men, potentially attributable to birth cohort differences or to health or environmental effects not captured in observed data. Now, keep in mind here that many environmental and health effects were captured in the observed data, and I suggest you read it to find out. They were just unable to identify any attributable cause. It's as if the chemicals were turning the frogs gay. Now, also remember that 2005 was the year that the APA started its research on masculinity. This also happens to be the same year that the collected research that was in the hands of the NIH definitively indicate that there was a major problem that was by all indications increasing. Now, reading further in this report, when we start looking at the numbers, we can see that the rate of decrease in male testosterone was a rate of 1% a year. This confirms an earlier Reuters article that I read that had an example saying that a 65-year-old man in 2002 would have a testosterone level 15% lower than a 65-year-old man in 1987. Now, again, this is above and beyond any normal decrease we expect to find in normal aging. Again, this is not just an American phenomenon. In 2010, a Danish study found a double-digit decrease in overall testosterone levels over a 40-year period. And I read here, it's a little frightening and thought-provoking that there is something affecting men's sex hormones, said Anna Maria Andersson. I bet she did. The research study leader from Riggs Hospitalet Clinic for Growth and Reproduction. Fertility doctor Peter Liegendorf said testosterone is vital for maintaining regular heart functions in addition to several other measures, such as aiding bone structure. It's worrying if men are suddenly lacking one of their key strengths that make them men, he added. He theorized that a combination of factors could be behind the reduced testosterone levels in modern men, such as greater use of pesticides, in food products, and increasingly unhealthy lifestyles. According to data from the Danish Medicines Agency, more Danish males are currently being prescribed testosterone, with numbers increasing from 437,000 in 2004 to 554,000 in 2008. Now, I found it interesting that the Danes have been keeping records for so long, and the history of this fertility clinic / hospital actually goes back 250 years. Since it became a government / public hospital in 1910, they must have large amounts of data. So as we see, there is a major issue with declining testosterone levels. I mean, most have seen and heard the low T and other male clinic advertisements at this point and should start connecting some dots. These guidelines from the APA are about feminist, anti-masculine social engineering. If the concern was at all based in medical health and scientific reason, then the inclusion of testosterone would have factored prominently. Now, while endocrinology and psychology are different fields, they and other sciences, they find a merger in the field of psychoneuroendocrinology. Now, we see here, just by looking at the titles of articles containing the word testosterone in the Journal of Psychoneuroendocrinology, that the hormone should not be absent in any research on male mental health. Here's a few of the headlines. The roles of testosterone and cortisol in friendship formation. Testosterone and depressive symptoms among men in the diabetes prevention program. Now, let me be clear. There are such things as fear, pride, cruelty, selfishness, and anger. But there is no such thing as toxic masculinity. There is a crisis of masculinity. There is a desperate need to restore masculinity and restore certain balance to our unnatural paradigm. The very values that the APA finds abhorrent, stoicism, competitiveness, aggression, and dominance, are some of the very traits that many need to fight their own battles and to navigate a complex world. It seems that they prefer a feminized population that prefers emotion over logic. As stated, not only is this guidance obvious political programming, it is scientifically and professionally remiss in addressing the real concerns of men worldwide. Now, I urge you to research these matters on your own and draw your own conclusions. And if you like this video, please hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe. Thank you.